Welcome to University Television Presents. I'm your host, Christy Amstutz, and I'm joined today by my distinguished guest, Dr. Bart Wilson. Dr. Wilson is the Donald P. Kennedy Endowed Chair in Economics and Law at Chapman University. His research uses experimental economics to explore the foundations of exchange and specializations and the origins of property. He also conducts research that compares decision-making in humans, apes, and monkeys. Dr. Wilson has published papers in the American Economic Review, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, and Proceedings of the Royal Society B, Biological Sciences and Nature Human Behavior. His research has been supported by grants from the National Science Foundation and the Federal Trade Commission. In 2020, he authored the book entitled The Property Species, Mine, Yours, and the Human Mind. Dr. Wilson, thank you so much for being here today and taking time out of your day to join us. How have you been enjoying your time in Boise so far?
It's been great.
Yeah, I heard you saw the blue this morning.
I did.
And that's always the best, tourist attraction for us here in Boise.
It was big and blue.
That's kind of like all you can say about it, right?
I mean, it was impressive, but it looked like carpet.
Yes, very much like carpet. We love our blue carpet here, or Smurf turf, as others like to call it. So yes. Well, thank you so much for being here. I know your research is extensive and goes way beyond economics, but for someone like me who maybe doesn't know a lot about that world of economics, can you explain economics in its most basic form?
Economics is about exchange, and human beings are the only species to trade one thing for another thing. And that really is what makes us different and what makes the lifestyles that we get to live possible. And so it's about how humans come up with the rules to make trade efficacious. How is it that we can produce more stuff? Why is it that we're innovative? And where does wealth come from in that sense? And so it comes from our ability to trade, and we want to understand how that works.
Wow, interesting. That makes it way more clear for me. I'm a media major, so understanding economics is a little bit above my head. But I love that you kind of talked about human behavior. And it's clear just in doing a little bit of reading about your work that you have many different passions, including economics, human behavior, property, and I would assume they're all interconnected in some way. How does that play out in your research?
Well, so I'm by training an experimental economist, which means I create virtual worlds in a laboratory with software, and I invite my undergraduates to participate in them, and then they get paid for the decisions they make. And the idea is to see how I think the world works versus what they actually do. And often they're telling me I'm wrong. and so that method is what underlies all the different kind of projects I work on. So I've used that method to compare humans and capuchin monkeys and humans and chimpanzees. I've also used it to explore what I'm going to be talking about here on Adam Smith. So he has some ideas about how the world works. I try to understand how those work. I build a little model, see what people actually do. And I've built worlds to see how people trade and how exchange creates wealth and when it doesn't. And so it's a method for kind of testing out ideas and then reformulating them and coming up with new ideas from that.
And where did this idea come from to build these virtual worlds?
Well, so experimental economics started in the 60s. My mentor and colleague, Vernon Smith, came up with the idea. He was skeptical about how economics worked out of the textbook. He said, well, this is what we teach, but this is what people do this.
Yeah.
And so he created a market with buyers and sellers, and he was surprised. It actually worked as we taught, but without all the assumptions that they give us in the textbook. And for him, that created a new method. Well, okay, sometimes the assumptions work, sometimes they're not needed. How can we test economics? Let's make it observational. And so that idea is what kind of underscores everything I do.
Yeah, and obviously you said you have undergraduates who participate in this research. Are they part of the economics? Are they non-economics majors?
Well, we try to get as broadly as possible.
Okay, cool.
So, and the idea is that they come in as human beings, not econ majors, not accountants, we want real people doing what they think is the best thing for them when they're faced with the decisions I give them.
Okay, super interesting. I love that. So you mentioned later tonight you're going to be the 5th guest in the Adam Smith lecture series here at Boise State. I know you've done quite a bit of research into his work. How have his ideas inspired you throughout your career?
Well, I actually pretty late in coming to Adam Smith. Like, I didn't study him as an undergrad. I actually checked out his books, and then I couldn't read them, and I put them back. I'm pierced by that. But and then I didn't study really at grad school either. But once I had a job as a professor, and I was teaching an honors class, and we wanted to, let's get back to the basics. What do kind of the founding father of economics, Adam Smith, what did he have to say about these ideas? And exploring it with students. And so that's how I got into it. And I realized that we tend to think that because history is cumulative and how we understand economics, everything about Adam Smith has been incorporated in what we know now. And it's not true. Something has been lost. And his caricature of what Adam Smith is about, what his famous book, The Wealth of Nations, is about, well, when you read it, it's not really about the caricature we see, that it's about selfishness or even the capitalism. That's, for him, is about trade and exchanging things and kind of understanding people at a individual personal level. And so that's when I realized that there's something here to offer and maybe kind of reground us in people.
Yeah.
Economics tends, if you read textbooks, they don't talk about people as much.
Yeah.
And I want that's the idea for him. For me, going back to Adam Smith is about people. He's interested in how they feel, how they think, and what they know. And those kind of basic tenets of kind of building economics back up is why I'm going back to Adam Smith.
Yeah, I love that. And, you know, kind of your work is centered around human behavior and how that all affects each other. And I think the term behavior has changed so much since Adam Smith, you know, created his groundbreaking in foundational economics. How has that changed since that time? So
behavior today has a very sciencey feel to it. You can apply it to stock market prices. You can apply it to butterflies. You can apply it to ecology. And so behavioral ecology, behavioral political science.
Yeah.
But that's a modern way of thinking. Adam Smith wouldn't use the word behavior like we do. For him, behavior was always embedded in something moral, and it was about how we interact with other people. And so the idea of applying behavior to ships or water molecules, that would be kind of foreign to him.
Yeah.
But so his word of choice was conduct. And what does conduct do? That brings in moral, how you conduct yourself, and you can't apply that to you can't apply it to like a dog. Dogs behave good or bad.
Yeah.
But they don't conduct themselves. People conduct themselves, and we worry and we think about how other people think about us and how we go about and carry ourselves. And so conduct brings morality back into economics, where it started with Adam Smith.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I'm wondering is there any, you kind of mentioned how so much has changed since then. Has anything stayed the same? Obviously, he's such a groundbreaking figure in economics, but what if those ideas are still the same?
Well, so his important contribution was to talk about how wealth is not money in the bank. It's not collecting gold bullion somewhere, which is the idea that in the 1800s and 1700s, it was about going out and colonizing, bringing the cash back, bringing the gold back. And Adam Smith said, no, what's important is about people and what they consume. What do they get? What kind of clothes do they get? What kind of food are they getting? What kind of services do they get? Wealth for him is how we live. And not counting money.
Yeah.
And those ideas are still around. We tend to think of like we want more trade because we want money coming here. But really, economics is about how we create goods and services and basically make our lives better and more comfortable.
Yeah, and that's obviously still the same.
Yes.
That's amazing. I think his work is so groundbreaking, and it's interesting to hear, what's kind of stayed the same and changed. Let's get into your book, because I think you're talking about your book a little later tonight. It seems like the sciences and humanities are much like oil and water a lot of the time. But your most recent book, The Property, Species, Mine, Yours, and the Human Mind, offers a cross-disciplinary compromise that is sure to be controversial, in quotation marks. What's so controversial about this?
Well, I have colleagues, I work with colleagues in the English department, and I have colleagues I work with primatologists. And when I got interested in the idea of what property is, I would talk to these different people, and they have very different views of what it is. And so you talk to people in humanities, and they will tell you property is something modern, Western European. It's kind of unique to kind of this particular culture. And then you talk to biologists and they'll say, no, scrub jays have property, squirrels have property, baboons have property. And so all sorts of animals have property. And so I wanted to think about what really is, what do the people who talk about property as being cultural and relative, and people who are talking about property as being universal across the animal kingdom? Like, they can't both be right. So how can I work on this? And so I'm a social scientist, and I go down the middle, but it's not going to make all of the people in humanities happy, and it's not going to make the biologists happy. And the thesis that I'll be talking about tonight is that property is a universal and uniquely human custom. So the biologists are like, well, are you sure only humans have it? My dog seems to really like his toy. And things like that. And I'm like, no, I'm going to just kind of discriminate what's different about how humans think about property. But I also, it is universally human, so it's not just something Western Europeans have. Because we tend to think in the West of property as in land or a building or something like that. And sure, that is unique in some sense too. That's not universal to all people. But what is common to all people is that they have property in tools, utensils, and ornaments. Things that we generally make for ourselves to be useful to ourselves. And every human group has some sort of property in those small set of things. And so that's the common part. But the other part that I think is important, it's not all, if you think about it biologically, kind of built into us genetically, it is something socially taught. And so I think the people in the humanities have it part right, and I think the biologists have it part right. There's something unique to humans, but it's also kind of passed through us. There's something about our genes that'll give us a brain, that gives us a mind, that gives us this ability to have property. But it also fluctuates and changes by culture and can be very differently employed around the world.
Yeah, and that book came out in 2020. How have you seen the response since then from those two different groups of people?
It'll take more than one book to change people's minds. But I think I do it in a way that wants to engage both sides in thinking about the world differently, and then kind of slowly change one mind at a time.
Yeah, I love that. Changing minds one book at a time. Why did you feel, how did you come to the decision that this was so important for you to research and write upon? So I started an experiment where we created a world where people had to discover they could exchange stuff. And we put it through the referee process, and our fellow economists anonymously were kind of skeptical of what we were doing. And they said, well, you're not enforcing contracts in the way we set up the world. And I'll talk about the world tonight. But we decided to change one little thing in the instructions. That is, people couldn't just move stuff from where they produced it to where they consumed it. They could also move it from other people's places where they produced it and consumed it. And all hell breaks out. And I was surprised by that. Generally, I've been building models of the world where people work together and they work out gains from trade. The world becomes more profitable, and we find all those situations. And this one, it was not that. And I didn't have a way to ground that and understand it. And so I started reading the basic kind of philosophers of what property was. And I noticed that they talked about it in terms of what was called property, not property rights. The modern word you're going to hear in law, philosophy, and economics is property rights. But what's property rights and what's property? What's the difference? Where did that come from? And property rights came in the 1800s, so it's a newer idea. But property goes as a word, as a concept, goes way back. It comes from Latin. So it seems to be with us for a longer time. What's the difference? And that is kind of got the book project off the ground. I'm like, what is property? Let me figure this out. And then I talked to biologists, I talked to people in humanities, and I'm like, well, they have two different views of this. They can't both be right here. How can I explore this, and can I come up with some kind of solution? So it was a way of trying to dig deeper than just take the concepts that are kind of combine me every day in economics and think, well, let me just interrogate that idea. What's property rights? Well, what's property? Yeah, It seems like every great project starts with one singular question and then develops into something bigger. So that's super interesting. I feel very personally interested in your work with humans and apes and how their decision-making processes may differ or are similar in some ways. How do you even begin to test this? I know you mentioned your virtual worlds, but...
Well, so we started off with the idea that let's take a task that the capuchin monkeys can handle.
Okay.
And then I want to replicate it with undergraduates as closely as possible. And part of what intrigued me about that was when I run an experiment normally with undergraduates, I give them instructions. I say, here's the softwares, here's how you do all this. Mm-hmm. But you can't do that with a capuchin. You can't give them instructions, right. Take them through it. They got to figure out by some other means. And so the trial and error is how they teach a capuchin to go through a different exercise. So I was going to do the same thing with my undergraduates. They're going to do the same trial and error. Right down to, so the way capuchins often get rewarded is they will make a decision on a computer screen, and then a little pellet shoots out a dispenser. They get this immediate food. Okay. So I did the same, kind of the equivalent of, they make decisions, and then quarters pop out a change machine. Pop, ding, ding, out come the change. They put it in a cup, keep collecting it. Yeah. And I give them no instructions about what they're going to do. And I'm going to see how they explore the space, how do capuchins explore the space. And so it's also simultaneously a test of me in terms of what I take for granted when I design an experiment, all the words and instructions I give them. And also then when they're very similar like this, but then the setup now is as close to be the same between capuchins and humans, but humans do different things and capuchins do different things. Why is that? Can we now try to interrogate that question? Then, that was kind of the first phase of our research. Okay. We just finished the second phase where now we want to ask questions that we can't do with non-human primates. So there are a lot of ethical constraints. We can't do things that endanger them. Right. And there's a theory out there about how ecology, kind of what the food type is like, affects how these non-human primates, in our case chimpanzees and bonobos, how they socially get along. And so what we did was we created a virtual world of scarce resources versus plentiful resources, clumpy or uniformly distributed. And then we said the undergraduates were basically becoming bonobos or chimpanzees. I didn't put it that way to them. But we give them their environments, and then we want to see how do they work out of those problems. And so the one example is, so chimpanzees have scarce resources and they're clumpy. So they tend to, when an interloper comes in, go violently attack them. But bonobos, which are very closely related, eat vegetation. And it's all around, it's pretty plentiful. Okay. And so when other groups come along, they just cross paths, they don't really fight. And so we created a virtual world where they were the scarce, either it was kind of scarce and it was clumpy, or a world where it was all kind of evenly distributed, and we want to see what happens to interlopers who come in. So we created a little robot that comes in that all started consuming the resources too. And sure enough, our chimpanzee avatars would literally go off and try to kill this interloper, much like chimpanzees in the wild do. Yeah. But the bonobo avatars just left them around, didn't care. And more than that, they became this one big group. And that was the kind of surprise. I didn't expect them, they didn't have to form one group. They could form a bunch of groups, but they formed big ones. Once there's no competition for resources out there, they want to be together, and they form this big social group. And that's pretty bonobo-like. Yeah. And so that's their second kind of round, and we are working on a third round now that we've kind of demonstrated how we can kind of bonobonize undergraduates or chimpanzeeize the undergraduates, how to look more specifically at different social relationships. So we're interested in particular about female relationships in chimpanzees and bonobos, and see how, again, this distribution of resources affects those relationships. It tends to be it's a newer area of primatology, and that is something that we want to kind of explore with this different method.
And so does that third stage continue in this virtual world that you've created?
Yes, it will. So part of the first part of the study will be to categorize what we think we know from the field And so I have really cool co-authors at Washington State and Emory who go to see chimpanzees and bonobos in Africa, and they have a bunch of data they've collected, and we're going to kind of organize that and then use that to set up our hypotheses in a virtual world.
And how long does this typically take? I mean, how long has your first and second stage been, and how long will your third stage take?
Oh, so the second stage took about four or 5 years.
Okay.
Basically, we're creating something from scratch.
Yeah.
So first version of the software we built didn't really work well. We had the subjects were telling us they weren't seeing it the way we were seeing things, or we thought they would respond in a particular way, and it was kind of chaotic. And so it takes a little time to refine how we want the world, how we present it to them, to make it useful to them, not so they're confused and things like that. And then once we get that, you collect data, and then you have to analyze that. It takes a couple years to really make sure you know what you know. Yeah. And so that project took 5 years. This next one will probably take longer, in part because it's a little more open about what female relationships we're trying to explore, what's the best one to start with. So we'll probably start with a bunch of different ones and kind of see how it evolves.
Super interesting. It's so cool that you get to build something from the ground up and kind of see it throughout its whole entire lifespan. That's super interesting. I've got to follow this research as you continue doing it. We are getting close to running out of time, but before we do, I just wanted to give you a chance to say anything you didn't already, maybe about what you're talking about tonight, or. So
tonight, I am going to integrate property and Adam Smith. I have been invited to speak about property, and I'm invited to speak about Adam Smith, but I've never been invited to do this both at the same time. Yeah. So I'm very excited about that. And so I'm going to set up what property is, how I understand that question, and then the second half of the talk will be about how Adam Smith was a key component of organizing how I think property works. And so that's how I'm going to put the two together.
Amazing. And where can people buy your book and get your book?
Well, it's on Amazon. It's on all the major bookstores. Everything is. You can go to OUP, Oxford University Press as well. But yeah, just type up Property Species Amazon. It'll pop right up.
Perfect. Well, I want to thank you so much for being here with me today, Dr. Wilson. We appreciate you sharing your time with us. And thank you at home for joining us as well. I'm your host, Christy Amstutz, and we'll see you next time on University Television Presents.